Former President Donald Trump lashed out at Senator Lindsey Graham today after Graham expressed public disagreement with Trump's latest statement on his abortion position. Trump, in a video published yesterday, said the issue of abortion access should be left to the states after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022. Now, despite pressure on his campaign by anti-abortion groups, the former president did not endorse any efforts to establish a federal limit on abortion, including a bill by Graham that would ban abortions after 15 weeks. Well, with his clear statement yet on the future of abortion rights since the fall of Roe v. Wade, Trump laid bare how faulty a messenger he had always been for the anti-abortion cause. His support shifted again after the Supreme Court's decision. While he bragged about appointing 3 of the justices who overturned Roe, he blamed the movement for Republican losses in the midterm elections. He mused aloud about the idea of a federal ban, but refused to give it the kind of ringing endorsement anti-abortion leaders wanted. And Hamas is reviewing the latest ceasefire proposal presented by mediators. Now, this is after negotiators left Cairo and a senior official said talks were on hold. Hamas criticized the proposal for not meeting Palestinian demands, but said it would nonetheless study it and respond. Special Counsel Jack Smith is urging the Supreme Court to reject Donald Trump's novel and sweeping claim that he is immune from all criminal prosecution, and particularly the charges of conspiring to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. And a campaign staffer for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has a lot to say, and she has said that the effort on the part of Robert F. Kennedy to become president is really about re-electing Donald Trump. She says she has a plan that would deny Joe Biden from being elected and forcing the entire election to be decided by the House of Representatives. She said Joe Biden is the mutual enemy of the Trump and Kennedy voter, and that her number one priority is depriving Biden of any re-election efforts. And more than 200 chemical plants across the country will be required to curb the toxic pollutants they release into the air under a regulation announced by the Biden administration today. Now, this regulation is aimed at reducing the risk of cancer for people living near industrial sites. This is the first time in nearly 2 decades that the government has tightened limits on pollution from chemical plants. And Jennifer and James Crumley, who were convicted of involuntary manslaughter for failing to prevent their teen sons from killing 4 students in the deadliest school shooting in Michigan's history, were each sentenced today to 10 to 15 years in prison. Their separate trials ended in guilty verdicts in February and March, making them the first parents in the country to be convicted over the deaths caused by their children or by their child in a mass shooting. And Arizona's highest court today upheld an 1864 law that bans nearly all abortions, a decision that could have far-reaching consequences for women's health care and election year politics in a critical battleground state. This is the news, and this is Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. This is hour 2 of Areva Martin in real time, and this is the hour where we go deep, where we dig behind those headlines and bring you those stories that people are talking about. Well, today it's all about the law. My esteemed legal panel is here, Mansfield Collins, a defense attorney, and Bobby Grace, a veteran prosecutor, and we have been tracking on this show. In fact, we were the only show in California that brought you gavel-to-gavel coverage of the federal bribery trial of an African-American former city council member, Dr. Mark Ridley Thomas. We covered that case with our justice correspondent, and after the convictions were handed down by the jury and sentencing by the judge, we have also been bringing you up-to-date information and news about the appellate process. Dr. Ridley Thomas vowed after his conviction to appeal the conviction and basically asked the appellate court, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, to throw out the convictions. He believes, his legal team believes, that there was insufficient evidence and a misapplication of the law that led to his convictions. And in a very, very well-written and lengthy brief filed a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Ridley Thomas and his legal team laid out their arguments. Well, yesterday, the U.S. District Attorney's Office had a chance to respond to that appellate brief, and not a lot of surprises in terms of them going after Dr. Ridley Thomas pretty aggressively, reiterating their narrative that he was one of the most powerful elected officials in the state of California and probably one of the most powerful African-American elected officials in the country. And they accuse him of using his position when he was on the County Board of Supervisors. The County Board of Supervisors in the Los Angeles County is a very, very plum position. There are only 5 of them. They manage a budget that's the size of many states. They have a great deal of power and influence over LA County, which has about 11 million people. And so the prosecutors accuse Mark Ridley Thomas of using his position as a county supervisor to force a dean at the University of Southern California, known as USC, to give his son, then Mark's son, Sebastian, who was leaving the California State Legislature. According to the prosecutors, Sebastian was leading under a cloud because he had been accused of sexual harassment. It was the height of the Me Too movement. So they say Mark, trying to help give his son a soft landing, pressured a dean at USC to give his son admissions into her graduate program, School of Social Work at USC, to give him a scholarship, to give him a teaching position, and to pay a nonprofit that he operated $100,000. And they say in exchange for this dean doing all of these things for Mark's son, Mark then voted on contracts that were before the County Board of Supervisors that would benefit the dean's School of Social Work at USC. According to the prosecutors, this dean's department was in dire straits. She was under tremendous pressure from the university as the dean of this social work program that had once been one of the most highly esteemed programs in the country, but had fallen on hard times, was in financial debt. And so they say the dean was looking for a lifeline. And they said she was coerced by Mark Ridley Thomas. And they said Mark did this not just for his son, but they said it was also reputational damage control. Because according to the prosecutors, Mark not only wanted to keep his son free from scandal related to these alleged sexual harassment complaints, but that he also had his own ambitions of running for mayor of the city of Los Angeles, and that any kind of scandal involving his son would be a problem for his efforts to become the mayor of Los Angeles. If all of this sounds like a bad movie, it really is. The facts are so salacious and they sound horrible. And for months and months, newspaper articles, particularly those in the corporate media, latched on to this theory by the prosecutors and started throwing out ridiculous numbers like, these contracts that the dean of social work at USC was getting were, these contracts were worth $8 million. And that there were secret letters and phone calls and text messages, and there's supposed to be all of this damning evidence. And folks were saying, oh my God, if the feds have indicted Mark Ridley Thomas and they're taking this to trial, he better try to enter into a plea deal, because if the feds come knocking on your door, they must have something on you and he's going to lose. And then we got to the trial, and the reality was so far from the hype. The evidence that the prosecution put on was so weak, so did not live up to all the hype. And the narrative that I just reiterated, which is their narrative, the evidence did not match the story. But despite that, our criminal justice system is not perfect. There was still a conviction on 7 of the over a dozen charges. And here we are. Mark Ridley Thomas saying I'm innocent, has said he's innocent from day one. The entire Los Angeles community, or at least most of the Black community, standing by him, church services, prayer vigils, protests in front of City Hall, the district attorney's office, or the U.S. attorney's office, I should say. And folks believing that Mark Ridley Thomas was railroaded, was just, given the worst, this is the worst prosecution ever, that this was always a non-meritorious case. that should have never been brought, and that had he been a white elected official, this case would not have ever seen the inside of a courtroom. So when we come forward, Mansfield Collins and Bobby Grace are going to help us understand the merits of the appeal filed by Mark Ridley Thomas and the response, the reply brief now by the U.S. Attorney's Office. We get their predictions about what they think will happen in August when this case is heard. Arguments are made before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm going out with the girls this weekend. Nails done, outfit stunner, and my skin, I know it's going to be glowing because I glammed up my shower routine with new Olay Indulgent Moisture Body Wash. It smells so luxurious and moisturizes deep into my skin with its super rich, creamy lather that's bursting with vitamin B3. So my skin glows and my confidence grows. Try new Olay Indulgent Moisture Body Wash for glowing skin in just 14 days.
Wireless headphones. That'll be $200.
I'll use my Capital One Quicksilver card.
Now that's a hit. You used the Capital One Quicksilver card, which makes you the hero of every purchase. With Quicksilver, you earn unlimited 1.5% cash back on every purchase everywhere.
I wanted running music, but unlimited 1.5% cash back is pretty heroic.
Good instincts. Every hero needs a theme song. The Capital One Quicksilver card. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com for details.
Do it all by yourself, baby girl. What's your name? Let me talk to you. Let me buy you a drink.
Spilled your drink? Quick, the quicker picker-upper. Bounty picks up spills quicker, and each sheet is 2 times more absorbent, so you can use less than the leading ordinary brand. So you can get back to your night. Bounty, the quicker picker-upper.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. Stay Housed LA has the resources you need to know your rights and the legal support to back them up. The COVID-19 pandemic has cost people their jobs and livelihoods. This has left an estimated 1/3 of households not being able to make rent and facing losing their homes. This is a fear no one in our community should have to face. You have rights, though, and Stay Housed LA is here to help. Stay Housed LA is a partnership between the County of Los Angeles, the City of Los Angeles, and local community and legal service providers. Together, they provide tenants with the information and support needed to exercise their rights so they can remain safely in their homes. Find out more about your rights by participating in a virtual tenant workshop. Get the legal assistance you need. Find additional resources in Los Angeles County and the City of Los Angeles. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA County for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. That's stayhousedla.org. Or call their hotline at 213-694-0040. We've got your black with a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
We are back, and we're talking about the appeal filed by Dr. Mark Ridley Thomas in the federal bribery trial, as well as the appellate reply brief that was filed just yesterday by the U.S. Southern District Office, talking about what the merits of this case are. Mansfield Collins is here. We're hoping Bobby Grace can join us as well. But Mansfield, before we jump into the appeal of Dr. Mark Ridley Thomas, you are a defense attorney. I'm sure you saw today what happened in that Michigan courtroom with Jennifer and James Crumbly. What would you have done as a defense attorney to try to get this judge to give a sentence to these parents that was less than the maximum sentence for involuntary manslaughter in the state of Michigan? I think you're on mute, Mansfield.
Is that better?
That is. Thank you. Welcome. I was asking your esteemed opinion, since you've been in this situation a lot as a defense attorney. What are the arguments you think these attorneys might have made that could have persuaded this judge to give them less than the maximum sentence?
Well, I think the die was cast during the actual trial. The defendant's testimony during trial, I don't think the husband testified, but the wife testified, and her testimony was less than riveting. It was less than persuasive. It was less than compassionate, and it attempted to divert and show that she had no knowledge of anything. And so her testimony actually fed right into the prosecution's playbook in this situation. I don't think that that the defense could have done anything after that to persuade this judge not to sentence him as she did today to 10 to 15 years. It's a terrible thing. And this is the first time in American jurisprudence that a case like this has actually gone to trial and a verdict has been rendered. But I think it sends a message to the community at large that the parents are going to have to be more focused on their children when their children are showing signs that they need attention and showing signs that they need some intervention. Parents have a responsibility, not only to themselves, but also to the public that their children will come into contact with.
Yeah, you're right. This is an unprecedented case, first in America's history. Now, we've heard of lots of cases where parents are responsible for negligent acts of their kids. You know, your kid throws a window in someone's house, or, you know, accidentally they're playing baseball or something, and, you know, they injure someone, or, you know, there's a civil lawsuit filed. We're very accustomed and familiar with those in our legal system, but this criminal, prosecution because of your child's mass shooting of kids in a school, this is a first, and hopefully does have the intended impact of sending a message of deterrence to other parents. So let's jump in, Mansfield, into this Mark Ridley Thomas, this reply brief. First question I have for you is, any surprises? Anything in the reply from the U.S. Attorney's Office that surprises you?
I didn't see any surprises. I just saw a brief that responded to the opening brief, and they did not do a very good job, in my mind, of knocking down any of the arguments made on appeal by Mark Ridley Thomas's excellent appellate attorneys.
You know, one thing that caught my attention, in all briefs start with the narrative, right? A summary of the case. The narrative laid out by the U.S. Attorney's Office doesn't fit the evidence that was produced at trial. So it's as if they are parroting the narrative that they've had about this case from day one and completely ignoring what was borne out in terms of evidence presented during the trial. Help lay people understand how that's possible, because on first glance, you may think, well, wait a minute, you can't keep making that same argument because that's already been either, disproven, or, you failed to produce evidence to support this at the trial.
This is what happens when you have a case of first impression. And what I mean by that is there is no Ninth Circuit case involving facts similar to the facts against Mark Ridley Thomas. There just is none. And so now we have the prosecution, the U.S. Attorney's Office, trying to fit a circle into a square and trying to force it into a square during trial, during its opening statements, during its closing argument, and now in reply to the opening brief of Mark Ridley Thomas. It's still the same problem, as you said, Areva. It's like trying to put a circle into a square. It doesn't add up. It doesn't establish that Mark Ridley Thomas received a fair trial. And in fact, the appellant, the opening brief establishes that Mark Ridley Thomas still did not receive a fair trial.
So one of the big arguments, race is obviously an issue in any criminal case because we know there's so much implicit bias in our judicial system. But race came up specifically in this case through what is called this Batson motion. Can you explain what a Batson motion is, how it came into play into this case, and how it's being played out in this appeals process?
There were two Black female jurors that were peremptorily dismissed from jury duty, and the basis for and the defense at that point indicated that they were objecting to the dismissal of these two Black female jurors on the basis of Batson, because the dismissal was based upon race, discrimination, sex, or any other protected status. The importance of that historically is that you want to have a balanced jury sitting in a defendant's case. And these presumably were two Black mothers that would have brought a point of view to the jury process that may not have been suitable or may not have been to the liking of the U.S. Attorney's Office, but nevertheless, their life experiences would have been crucial in determining whether or not and how to evaluate the evidence put on by the U.S. Attorney's Office. And when the challenge is made, the burden then shifts to the prosecution, the U.S. Attorney's Office, to show a non-pretextual basis for their excusal of the two Black female jurors. And then after they try to explain that, the judge exercises, in this case, her discretion to determine whether or not the decision to excuse the two Black female jurors was reasonable and not based upon racial discrimination. So there are problems with implicit bias at every step of the Batson challenge. And ending up with the judge who now has to sit and make a determination on race and discrimination. And depending on the judge's experiences, depending on the judge's own biases, that decision will be made properly or improperly. In this case, the decision to uphold the excusal of the two Black female jurors was a bad decision. It was an erroneous decision.
So in the appellate brief filed by Dr. Mark Ridley-Thomas, his team raises this decision by the judge to uphold the excusal or the removal of these two Black women from the jury. What do you make of how the U.S. attorney responded to that argument in its reply brief?
Well, it's clear that the government is very concerned about the Batson challenges because they spend a lot of time trying to show that they use non-race or non-discriminatory grounds to excuse the two Black female jurors. And by the way, that's what you have to do. It's just whether or not you are convincing and it is persuasive enough and it is consistent with the law. I don't think that they passed that test. I don't think they met the standards. And I think that that is one solid ground of appeal that the courts may uphold in terms of granting a reversal based upon denial of a fair trial, denial of a jury of his peers.
So I'm glad you bring that up because that goes to the next question. What happens? So let's say the judge looks at the record, which they're going to do. They look at the arguments made by Dr. Ridley-Thomas, and we should note that there were some friends of the court, some civil rights lawyers, some African-American professors, law professors who filed friends of the court briefs asking the court to deem the removal of those two Black women as being error on the part of the court. But let's assume that the appellate court agrees that it was pretextual, that race was the real reason that these two Black women were removed because Mark Ridley-Thomas is a Black man. What happens in terms of the case? Does it get thrown out? Does it go sent back to this judge for a retrial?
If it's egregious enough, they could, in fact, determine that there should be the conviction should be reversed, and they could enter a plea. They could enter a judgment of an acquittal. It's more likely that if he wins on this, if Mark Ridley-Thomas's appellate team wins on this point, that they will, in fact, probably the Court of Appeals will order a new trial to determine this particular issue, and probably consistent with their findings, they will make it very difficult in a second trial for the U.S. Attorney's Office to excuse or remove Black female jurors in the future.
Yeah, so I know Bobby Grace, a veteran prosecutor, has joined us. Bobby, this Batson issue is troubling because as a Black woman, obviously, I have a concern about jurors who are removed on the basis of race. What did you make of the reply brief on the Batson issue?
So, Areva, good afternoon. It's pretty typical government reply with respect to Batson Wheeler challenges. I think these are very, very difficult challenges to make. either in state court or federal court. I don't think that, based upon the evidence that we have here, that it's going to be successful with the appellate court, not because it's not a significant issue. And the way that you and Mansfield have framed it, it's definitely a significant issue. It's just a high bar to get across in order to be successful, especially in federal court, because they believe that.
Hold that thought for me, Bobby. Hold that thought. I want to go deeper into that about the high bar of an appeal in general, not just on the Batson issue, but the uphill battle that Dr. Ridley Thomas has in this case. Stay with us when we come forward more on the appeal of the conviction involving Dr. Mark Ridley Thomas. KBLA Talk 1580.
Right time. More of Areva Martin in real time when we come forward.
I'm Amber Payton. Here's the latest on the Black Information Network. The Caucus of African American Leaders is recommending changing the name of the Francis Scott Key Bridge because it honors a man who owned slaves. They suggest honoring Perrin Mitchell, Maryland's first African American congressman, instead. While Governor Wes Moore acknowledges the proposal, he is currently prioritizing the recovery and rebuilding efforts following the bridge's collapse. Maryland Governor Wes Moore has signed the first of hundreds of bills passed by the just completed Maryland General Assembly session. One of the first measures signed by the governor, who is Black, was the Maryland Port Act. The legislation supports the businesses and workers impacted by the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse. The bill also creates a new permanent scholarship program for the families of transportation workers who died on the job. Moore also signed a bill that expands speed cameras in work zones and raises fines for speeders. That's the latest. I'm Amber Payton on your home for 24/7 News, the Black Information Network.
SIG alert back in La Crescenta involving a stalled tractor trailer continues to block two right lanes of the 210 West at Lowell Avenue. Right now, stop traffic continues over 35 minutes from Angeles Crest Highway. In Artesia, 6-car accident has the right lane blocked on the 91 East at Pioneer Boulevard, and heavy traffic flow continues from Main Street over 40 minutes. Accidents been cleared from the Sepulveda passes 405 North at Ventura Boulevard, and watch for a heavy delay in recovery over 45 minutes from Sawtell Boulevard underpass. And in Long Beach, a crash is on the right shoulder to the connector of the 710 North on the 405, and slowing continues from Long Beach Boulevard.
Hey, it's Dean Sharp. How does 3 months of free electricity and a lifetime of energy savings sound? Well, it's yours when you go solar with Sunlux. Learn more at sunlux.com, sunlux.com.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
Tiger Woods went through another 9-hole practice round today in preparation for the Masters this week. Tiger said he can win his 6th Masters if, in his words, everything comes together. That means if his body holds up. The 48-year-old Woods has played only 24 holes this season and has not participated in a PGA event since the Genesis Invitational here in LA in February. Tiger is planning to tee off in the first round of the Masters on Thursday. Injuries, surgeries, and a near-fatal car accident have slowed Tiger's career, but he is still trying to be competitive. Tiger's last Masters title came in 2019. He made the cut last year, but had to withdraw in the 3rd round because of pain in his right foot. Kawhi Leonard will miss his 5th straight game tonight in Phoenix. The Clippers star still has soreness in his right knee. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Travis Smiley.
And I'm Captain Mayor Emma Sharif.
You have no doubt been hearing promos and expert conversations on our various weekday shows and downloading details at KBLA1580.com about our climate justice campaign, which is now in full effect.
The city of Compton is pleased to partner with KBLA Talk 1580 to celebrate Earth Day 2024 as we serve, share, and help our city shine.
And KBLA Talk 1580 is just as excited to join the city of Compton as we broadcast live and bring our KBLA delegation with us to help clean and beautify our community, and you are invited to join us.
Come meet us on Saturday, April the 20th from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. at 212 West Cypress Street in Compton as we fan out to clean up our city.
The first 50 KBLA listeners to hit our website at KBLA1580.com will receive a free KBLA tee when you join us on Saturday morning, April 20th from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. at 212 West Cypress Street in Compton. Now, no show, no shirt, but sign up at KBLA1580.com right now to help us clean up Compton as part of Earth Day 2024.
We will see you on Saturday, April the 20th, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. at 212 West Cypress Street in the city of Compton to do our part for Earth Day 2024.
We are KBLA Talk 1580, caring about the climate, caring about the community, cleaning up Compton.
Tips to help improve your credit score in 2024. Establishing credit is an important key to achieving financial health, but building a credit history from scratch can feel challenging since you need credit to build credit. First, what does it mean to build credit? All consumers have a score between 300 and 850. You want your score to be as high as possible as lenders look at your credit score to make loan and credit decisions. A good credit score shows you have a track record of borrowing money responsibly. Remember, it's never too late to build or rebuild your credit. This segment is sponsored by JP Morgan Chase & Company.
Helping to broaden your political and moral imagination with our 2024 Climate Justice Campaign. We're KBLA Talk 1580.
As we go a little something like this.
Hey, it is me, D.L. Hugo, and I am thrilled to be heard weekdays in my hometown on KBLA Talk 1580. So check out the D.L. Hugo Afternoon Show weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. exclusively on KBLA Talk 1580. We got a whole lot to talk about, let me tell you.
We are back, and veteran prosecutor Bobby Grace and defense attorney Mansfield Collins are with me, and we're talking about the reply brief filed by the government in the federal bribery conviction of Dr. Mark Ridley Thomas, who was one of LA's, I'd say one of California's most powerful and prominent elected officials. And there's a battle now going on in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal over what happens with that conviction. Mark Ridley Thomas's team filing an extensive brief arguing that the conviction should be overturned, that the facts were not proven, the facts that were asserted by the prosecution were not proven, and that the application of the law to those facts should not have resulted in a conviction. So, Bobby, before the break, you were talking about the difficult hurdle that any one filing an appeal on the issue of the Batson motion, which is the exclusion of jurors on the basis of race, how high a burden that is. But just talk in general about the appellate part in general. Mark Ridley Thomas has a stellar team of lawyers, including a former judge who sat on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals as one of his attorneys. And he also has a dean from a prominent law school here in the state of California on his appellate team. So with all that firepower, I mean, does that make the battle any easier for someone like him? I think you may be on mute, Bobby.
Let's see.
Bobby?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
As Mansfield can probably co-sign as someone who practices in federal court, the government generally gets the benefit of the doubt in most issues and close calls in appellate decisions. Here, we've got some different things. You got the Batson-Wheeler, which really focuses on what happened at trial and what the lawyers did. And then you have some real statutory nitty-gritty, is this a crime issues that the appellate court is going to have to dig in and really discuss. It's going to be a high bar, but as we've talked about on previous occasions, this is a good opportunity for the appellate court to make clarity on the whole issue of honest services, bribery, what's needed. And a lot of people have been weighing in, Areva, talking about how the government has misused these laws and that they've gone too far in terms of going after elected officials, in particular Black elected officials, which is a major issue coming into an election year.
Yeah, this honest service fraud issue, man, so this is a big one. Honest service fraud, most people probably have never heard of it. Basically, the argument is that there's a quid pro quo. And what I'm reading from the reply brief from the government, they say, contrary to defendant's straw man claim erected for the first time on appeal, they said for the first time, the government did not proceed on the theory that the quid was a perceived reputational benefit. The indictment and jury instructions identified the quids in the bribery scheme as the USC admissions, scholarship, professorship, and $100,000 payment from USC to United Way. And both parties argued to the jury based on those quids alone. So for those folks that didn't take Latin, Mansfield, tell us what the quids and the quid pro quo means.
You know, in this situation, it's nothing like the standard quid pro quo that we learned in law school. And that's the problem with this case. Again, I don't want to circle back too many times to indicate that the district attorney, the U.S. Attorney's Office is still trying to fit a circle into a square, but that's sort of what they're doing with respect to honest services and quid pro quo. The standard classic quid pro quo is A, promises to do something, in return B gives A some money, and there's a corrupt purpose that has to be proven. It has to be proven that someone entered into a quid pro quo with a corrupt purpose. The evidence in this case just doesn't establish that. It didn't establish it during the trial, and it's been raised on the appeal by Mark Ridley Thomas's appellate attorneys. And in the reply brief, the government only talks about generalities about their belief that the evidence supported a conviction for honest services. But in fact, what they're trying to do is expand the notion of honest services so broadly that they're going to criminalize regular conduct that elected officials engage in all the time. And that's the fear, that they have criminalized regular conduct that goes way beyond the statutory interpretations, the classic interpretations of what a quid pro quo is. This is not anything new. These statutes are not anything new in terms of bribery and corruption, but they are new in terms of how they're being applied to the facts in this case. We never have seen a case like this where those statutes are being applied.
So, Bobby, what I'm reading from the government's reply, they said the government's bribery theory, soliciting financial benefits for an official's family member in exchange for a government contract, falls comfortably within the honest service fraud statute as interpreted by, and they cite this case, Skilling v. United States. So what do you make of that? So the government is saying here the bribery theory is simple. You solicited financial benefits for an official's family member, and in exchange for a government contract. So Marilyn Flynn, the dean, wanted the government contract, and in exchange for the government contract, benefits were given to Dr. Ridley's son, i.e. the professorship, the scholarship, etc. So they say that's the quid pro quo. What do you make of that?
Well, there's two things that's going on here, which makes the whole case confusing. The bribery case was slim at best, if you remember, Areva. A lot of the things that they put in the prosecution's brief were facts that weren't proven at trial. And I'm trying to struggle to figure out, okay, can you, as a prosecution or the defense, bring up facts that weren't proven in court in order to prove something that the jury actually never found any of the facts that they're using for the bribery, in my opinion.
And that, Bobby, you weren't here at the beginning. I started the show by saying when I read the brief, they are sticking to their pre-trial narrative, but their pre-trial narrative in many parts fell apart at the trial because they didn't have evidence to support that narrative. But yet in this 137-page reply brief, they are back to basically just reiterating their pre-trial narrative about what they thought happened, or they concocted in their brains happened, but it wasn't what was produced at trial. So what happens in a case like this, Bobby, when the case is argued on a theory that wasn't proven?
Well, my fear is that the appellate court may come down in the same way that the trial judge came down, in terms of giving the government the benefit of the doubt of something that wasn't really proven at trial. The honest services part of it is critical here, because I think everybody agrees that getting the nonprofit, the money for the nonprofit, was legal, right? That was a legal act, right? And so then everything flows from there in terms of the government's argument that everything was illegal here. And then we switch back to the bribery, which again, as you and Mansfield had already pointed out, wasn't proven at trial. It's pretty, if they had proven that in fact, Marilyn Flynn had lobbied for a contract, and that it was supposed to be benefits for Margaret Lee Thomas's son, that's pretty easy for people to understand. But the contract was already in place, and no evidence was placed or really, in my mind, was given that any of the facts that related to Sebastian Lee Thomas were in fact true. There was a lot of speculation there. Somebody was allowed to get on the stand and say this in open court without really being challenged at all as to whether any of this was true. So hopefully the appellate court will look at that and say there's no foundation for the bribery count, and the honest services, as Mansfield been pointed out, has gone way too far in terms of what the federal government should allow for illegal conduct by politicians.
When we come forward, I want to talk about another key point in the reply brief, and it's the notion that the government is advancing, that Margaret Lee Thomas is advancing a new theory, and that theory is that the case was based on reputational benefit. And they're saying this was something that wasn't introduced at the time of the trial. It's being introduced now for purposes of appeal, and it's inconsistent with the defense put on by Margaret Lee Thomas. When we come forward, more on KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
We ask seniors how to prevent Medicare scams.
My best advice, if you get a phone call, do not talk to the person. These people are well trained. Don't talk to them.
They don't know me. They're just trying to scam me.
Don't be fooled. Hang up. Just hang up.
Never give out your Medicare number.
They're going to get your number to put in a false claim.
If I get a call from someone, I don't pick up the phone. And should I pick up the phone and they ask for information, then I hang up.
How do you detect Medicare fraud?
Just like I check my credit card statements, I check my Medicare statements monthly.
Scammers can get a hold of your number, order medical devices through your account, and you're not even going to know about it if you don't look at your statement.
Check your statement every month.
If you get your statement and you see something that you know you did not have done, you report it.
Call your Senior Medicare Patrol.
To report Medicare fraud, call the Senior Medicare Patrol at 855-613-7080.
It's a celebration of a living legend. It's the Farewell Tour. It's May featuring Frankie Beverly.
Thank you for the love to me.
Also featuring the soul icon, Anthony Hamilton. Plus, After 7. It's a Mother's Day celebration, May 12th in the Kia Forum. In commemoration, come in your all white. Get tickets at Ticketmaster. Presented by the Black Promoters Collective. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 believes in community empowerment through the arts. Dia Chucha Central Cultural is on a mission to transform community in the Northeast San Fernando Valley and beyond through ancestral knowledge, the arts, literacy, and creative engagement. The Northeast San Fernando Valley has a population of about 500,000, the size of the city of Oakland, yet it has no bookstores, art galleries, or full-fledged cultural spaces until Tia Chuchas opened its doors in 2001. Founded by renowned poet and activist Luis Rodriguez, Tia Chuchas Cultural Center provides a year-round free or low-cost arts and literacy bilingual intergenerational programming in mural painting, music, dance, writing, visual arts, healing art sessions, and healing talking circles. Activities also include Mexica, Aztec dance, indigenous cosmology, philosophy, and 2 weekly open mic nights, one in Spanish, the other in English. In addition, they host author readings, film screenings, and art exhibits. To express yourself, heal yourself, attend an event, or volunteer, please visit www.tiachucha.org. That's TIACHUCHA.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
We are back. Okay, Mansfield, this seems to be a really big deal because it gets repeated throughout this brief. And the prosecution is arguing that Mark Ridley Thomas has introduced this new claim that reputational benefit was the quid. And the government is saying that's contrary to the record and the court's instructions. They're saying reputational benefit was the motive and not the quid. So they go on to say the alleged theory that the quid was perceived reputational benefit, and they cite the appellate brief, exists nowhere in the record. From indictment to closing argument, the government's theory was clear. The 4 things of value, or quids, defendants demanded and solicited were the USC admission, scholarship, professorship, and $100,000 payment from USC. They go on to say defendant repeatedly acknowledged in both his closing argument and motion for judgment of acquittal that these 4 benefits were the alleged quids. So there's now a factual dispute about the record. How does that get resolved on appeal? Because the government is saying, wait a minute, we never said that the reputational benefit was the quid. We were always clear it was these 4 other benefits. And they're saying, and you, defendant, agreed that they were the 4 of these 4 things, the scholarship, the professorship, the money, etc. That's a big mess.
Yes, and it's going to require a lot of reading of trial transcripts by the research clerks for the judges on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which probably is going to lengthen the process for resolving the appeal in this case. And I recall that during the closing argument of the U.S. Attorney's Office, they mentioned reputational benefits. And so now what we're talking about is a difference in interpretation of Mark Ridley Thomas's attorneys and the U.S. attorneys as to what the government meant when it argued to the jury that there were reputational benefits. Now the government is saying, well, we really only meant that it was a motive. So yes, this is a fight, and this is an interpretation of what actually happened during the trial. And you're right, Areva, this now has become a factual dispute as opposed to just simply a legal dispute.
Yeah, and I know you were there, Mansfield, during most of this case, so your analysis is spot on because it's not just the reading of the briefs, but you were there to observe what was said and done. Let me read this to you, Bobby. Again, this is the reply brief. The government says, during deliberations in a supplemental instruction, defendant approved, yet fails to acknowledge on appeal, the court instructed the jury that the thing of value in this case is alleged to be one or more of the following: admission to the University of Southern California for Sebastian Ridley Thomas, a scholarship for Sebastian, a paid professorship for Sebastian, and a $100,000 payment. While the instruction enumerated the alleged things of value for the federal program bribery count, it equally informed what the quids were for the honest service fraud counts. So it seems like, Bobby, there's this argument now about whether those 4 things were the quids for the federal program bribery count only, or were they equally the quids for the honest service fraud counts?
And so that, as Mansfield has been pointing out, that's going to be a big battle in terms of the facts of this. But Areva, if you saw the prosecution's kind of preliminary or procedural posturing with respect to the case, they talk about the reputational benefits to Mark Ridley Thomas. They talk about how he was thinking about running for mayor, and then all of these things came out, and all of a sudden he wasn't running for mayor. So it seems like the prosecution here is talking out of both sides of their neck. I think they're going to have a hard time with respect to the honest services part of this, because the appellate court is going to be looking at this and saying, you can't have it both ways, prosecutors, and you need to stick to one particular part of this. And just the facts that they kind of aver early on don't match up to what they're arguing as what happened at trial.
So, Mansfield, the reply brief, as you said, reading the trial transcripts, they make citations to the record. They give page numbers and paragraph numbers. And we know from reading Mark Ridley Thomas's brief, they do as well. This seems now to have become back to this factual dispute about whether these 4 items were only acknowledged by the defendant with respect to the federal bribery count, or also with respect to the honest service fraud count, is going to, as you said, take some law clerk lots of painstaking review to figure this out. Does this help or hurt Mark Ridley Thomas that this is now a big dispute about these 4 elements and which cause of action were they associated with?
By far, it helps Mark Ridley Thomas's appeal, because it establishes that if we can't figure out what the actual facts were that the jury relied upon to convict Mark Ridley Thomas, then how could the jury figure out what those facts were? And we're lawyers, and we're trained to analyze and apply legal precedents, and we're confused by the facts in this case as they match up with the law that the U.S. Attorney's Office has tried to apply. So if there's a big factual dispute between Mark Ridley Thomas's attorneys and the government's attorneys, then I think that bodes well for the proposition that the jury was swayed by other than the facts, because the facts are so confusing that the jury was probably swayed more by, unfortunately, implied bias, confirmational bias, in that this was a Black defendant, and there is a stereotype of Black defendants who are elected officials and that they must be corrupt. But there's no evidence in this case that Mark Ridley Thomas was corrupt. And so, yes, this basically establishes a good grounds for the Court of Appeals to establish that there was no factual basis for the jury to convict.
This just also confirms, Mansfield and Bobby, this is not a case where a non-trained person, the smartest person in the world, as you just said, Mansfield, would have a difficult time understanding this. So to have your life, your freedom, not your life like life or death, but your freedom hanging in the balance, and having someone who's never, ever studied bribery or honest service fraud, having to decipher, the complexity of a case like this just seems so inherently unfair. And I believe in our jury system, but man, it looks like, as you said, Mansfield, the jurors must have been so confused, which is why the verdict, seems like they split the baby on it. And let's not forget that, chances are they knew that this white older dean had accepted a plea deal. So if you're thinking in your mind, well, she pled guilty, so there must be something wrong here. There must have been a crime committed, because this white woman definitely wouldn't plead guilty if there was no crime committed. It's hard to believe that Mark Ridley Thomas could have gotten a fair shake by this jury. And the jury had to have been as confused now as the lawyers. I mean, the lawyers are literally pointing the fingers at each other saying, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. You said that. No, you said that. Bobby, last word. This is a mess.
It is a mess, Areva. And if you recall, the 4-person went on camera and gave some very confusing statements that kind of brings all this to focus, that the jury was confused. It seems like the prosecutors are confused, and now the defense is trying to bring that up to the courts. So we'll see what happens. Stay tuned. And
yes, watch this space, as they say. Thanks so much to both of you for joining me. We're going to continue to watch this. The next voice that you hear will be Robin Ayers in the Raw Report. Thank you for joining me today. This is KBLA Talk 1580.